They live almost exclusively within the reptilian cortex of their brain, which is in the lower part of the brainstem and is the earliest evolutionary part of the human brain. It's uniquely designed for nothing else other than predatory, hunting, survival, sexual reproduction, and fear and anxiety. And that's what the reptilian is. The reptilian is the psychopath. They do shapeshift. They shapeshift by constantly changing their personas and their personalities. They will invent a new persona to manipulate a person, place, organization, or entity. One minute they can be a New Age head, the next day they can be a right-wing Nazi. This is why so many of our politicians are psychopaths. And this is why so many of them can do the most incredible things, like tell the most unbelievable lies in front of the whole world and then completely backtrack on it, because of this ability they have to switch personas. The previous persona, you made that promise, told you what they wanted when they ran for election, has then been switched off and the new one has come in. They have shift literally in terms of their own consciousness and personality, and the new version is not responsible for what the previous version did. This explains why we are flabbergasted by the hypocrisy of big business, by the hypocrisy of politics, how they can say one thing and do another, and even by the hypocrisy of certain individuals we may encounter in our own lives, who can string you along for so long with a persona or a version of themselves and then suddenly change overnight. They're interdimensional. They're interdimensional in the sense that they're just like the rest of us. Their consciousness has manifested into this reality through our nervous system and our brain, in order for us to experience this reality. Where us, the 96% of people who are empathic, who have an understanding of compassion and want what this show and what this program and this station wants today, peace, we manifest this reality for us. We're trying so hard, but there's another kind of consciousness. It's a consciousness parasite that's predatory, and it manifests through a predatory driven neurology and physiology, and they're called the psychopaths. They are the ones who are causing all the problems in the world. They are the ones who are causing all the problems in our lives. These are the ones who place all the consciousness parasites in our mind, going right back to Babylon, of organized religion, totalitarian government, social hierarchies, racism, mind control, sexism, the destruction of the right brain, the defeat of the feminine principle and replacing it with the patriarchal principle. This is where it all comes from. They're not from space. They're not from the draconian nebula or wherever they're from. They're right here on Earth, and they are a predatory human being. They are an evolutionary offshoot that's here to attack the rest of us. And this, if we want peace in the future, we are going to have to confront this shadow within our society of the psychopath and do something about it. And that's happening right now. There is a shift in consciousness where many people have started waking up, but they're being locked into a second level of the control system. They're starting off, and the first part is they're learning that the whole system is bunk, that we're being lied to and manipulated. Democracy isn't real. Big business isn't business if it needs big taxpayer funding and bailouts. That everything on TV is a lie. And that's a wonderful thing when people break from that. But then they get trapped in the second level of the manipulation, in all these fear-based secondary programs of fear jocks and other individuals who have this agenda to trap people within a system where they live in fear of an imaginary Illuminati or whatever the control system is. These people who control this planet they're not any more slick, intelligent or brilliant than the rest of us. They're just good at being devious and making us believe a certain way. And they've set up a whole series of traps for us to stop us from reaching our level of conscious enlightenment and personal liberation. That wall is beginning to break down now. There's a big interest in psychopaths now taking off worldwide, and this is not an accident. This is an evolutionary jump. We're now becoming aware that something that isn't quite human has lived amongst us and has controlled us for about 3,500 years, and this individual is the psychopath. Now, how do we deal with this? Well, we have to deal with this issue by first recognizing that it exists. Unfortunately, the likes of mainstream psychiatry does not believe that psychopaths exist because fundamentally they don't believe in the concept of evil. This is one of the reasons I consider psychiatry to not even be close to being a science. It's a form of voodoo at best. Voodoo that medicates and puts people in an internal victim complex where they give them a false diagnosis and they tell them there's something wrong with them. 9 times out of 10, these people are perfectly normal. No, 99 times out of 100, these people are perfectly normal. They're just going through the normal psychological and emotional fluctuations of life that's part of what existence in this reality is, and these people should be left alone. Psychiatry, on the other hand, also goes to enormous lengths to deny that the psychopath even exists, because psychiatry really only believes that everything that's caused in the human condition is a result of chemical imbalances within the human brain. They cannot grasp the concept of evil. They don't believe in it. So a psychopath to them is no more real than a leprechaun, a fairy, or an elf. They tend to put pernicious names on it to cloud and muddy the issue. Antisocial personality disorder, sociopath, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder if it's a female psychopath. None of these things are real. These are all part of the control system. The Diagnostics and Statistics Manual of the American Psychiatric Association 60 years ago had 6 mental disorders in it. They were all very real. They range from psychopathic to schizophrenia to extreme depression. Nowadays, there's nearly 600. They invent these diseases in order to sell pharmaceutical drugs. This is also part of the lockdown. The reason why this happens is because psychopaths are running the show at the very top. Our leaders of business, science, education, government, and media are either psychopathic or they're working towards a psychopathic agenda. And much of this is to stop us from recognizing what the real issue is, that there's a predatory subspecies among the human race that's here to prey upon us. They do this in a number of ways, psychiatry being one of them, democracy being another. Democracy is a wonderful system for psychopaths. Tell me what you want and I'll give it to you once you vote for me. And then when they get in power, they don't care. The collapse in the global financial system is completely a case of psychopathic control system. The financial system collapsed, and the psychopathic mindset, instead of holding their hands up and saying the current version of capitalism doesn't work, let's return to a previous version of mercantile capitalism, they don't do that. They demand a taxpayer bailout. This is how the psychopathic mind thinks. This is how the psychopathic mind functions. It is the eternal parasite. It's a parasite if it's in a relationship with you. It's a parasite in a government that's controlling you. And it's absolutely a parasite if it has anything to do with money. It's a parasite that feeds on energy. Now, when we talk about energy, what is energy? Energy can be everything from your sexual energy to the financial aspects of your labor, the things you've worked hard for. They are parasites and they will take it all, everything from you. And this is what's causing the chaos in society. This is why the average Joe Bloggs comes home from work in the evening, switches on the TV, and knows fundamentally inside him that nothing is right. Things are not making sense. What we've all called the first stage of waking up. It happens to all of us. Things should not be this difficult. We live on a beautiful planet. We have tremendous abundance. We are not overpopulated. We have all the means for free energy, for everything we want, and yet it doesn't seem to happen. But yet they hold these carrots in front of us. Every week the newspapers have a new miracle cure for cancer, and yet people around us die of cancer. Every week they tell us that the electric car is coming, and yet we're just driving bigger and bigger cars with larger combustion engines, making us more dependent upon fossil fuels. And it goes on and on. And this is called gaslighting. Gaslighting is a technique psychopaths use to alter your state of reality by making you believe that the world is the way it is or your life is the way it is just because it is. It just happens that way. And none of it happens that way. It's all planned, it's all engineered, it's all meticulously drawn out in order to control us. every aspect of our lives. And the psychopath is always one step ahead, creating a false reality for us to get trapped into. So we do everything except look at our own lives and our own humanity and see the amazing potential within it. Everything from telling us that the pyramids were built by aliens, all the way up to telling us that, fossil fuels have to be phased out, but at the same time they keep giving us bigger cars, is to stop us from actually grasping our own independence and taking control of things by ourselves. And this is so very important in the psychopathic scheme of things. We're made to feel like pathetic little useless humans who just pollute the planet, who shouldn't be here, and we're not good enough to the Rockefeller Foundation and the Bill Gates Foundation and the Richard Dawkins Foundation and all these other things that have been set up to make us forget our amazing and incredible potential as human beings. And it's all rooted in something I call the psychopathic control grid. The psychopathic control grid is the lockdown that we have on this planet. It's been engineered and implemented by wealthy aristocratic psychopaths for the most part, and their cronies who are psychopaths they've recognized on the way up in amongst the lower classes, who they have allowed to come up and feed at the trough with the rest of them. This system was developed, this pyramidal system was developed in Babylon 3,500 years ago, and it's been working very well for them ever since. The cold eye at the top of the pyramid is the reptilian eye of the psychopath. It just looks down on the rest, and it uses hierarchy and control and partition and segmenting different stratas apart in order to keep control, just like an individual feral psychopath in his own life or her life will do. They will maintain all kinds of games and roles and keep all their different enablers apart so they don't see the full picture. Now, for the first time in history, you can see it on stations like this, and you can see it all over the world now as we're waking up. A new generation is starting to move back from the canvas. We're starting to get further and further back from the canvas, and we're starting to see the full picture. At first, it's fuzzy, but as we get further back and look at more things, we begin to see that an image is appearing. And that image is the psychopath. And this is our evolutionary challenge that we are going to have to overcome. We're not going to overcome them on their terms. We're going to overcome them on our terms, because we're creative, we're compassionate, we're intelligent, and we don't do things like build gas chambers, killing fields, and concentration camps. We're not like that. They're like that. We do it through non-compliance. We do not comply with their system. We do not comply with their agenda. We become as self-sufficient as possible. We stop playing into their system. Their system is completely dependent upon our involvement with it. We don't vote. We stop voting. We do not play their games anymore. We grow our own food if possible. We pay as little tax as possible. We keep below the radar, and we take care of our own lives, and we form small independent communities, and we use things like the internet to reach out and find each other. And when we do this, we're undermining their system. The lower layer of the pyramid has begun to crack, and it's starting to fall out from underneath them. And that's what's happening already. This is why they're trying to take control of the awakened community with things like the Zeitgeist movement, the Venus Project, and other sort of slick professional truther things, which are not really anything other than something they've sent out. Just like they sent out things like feminism, which was created by the CIA and Gloria Steinem back in the 1950s. They sent that out to control the women. There is a war against human consciousness, and this war against human consciousness is to place consciousness parasites within our psyche, which rob us of our full potential and always have us externalizing ourselves to control systems which will never serve our interest, which will always lie to us and always pretend they have an answer, and they never do. So how do we deal with the psychopath? Non-compliance, no witch hunts. We recognize there is a predator amongst us, and we implement no contact ever again. If you have a psychopath in your personal life, and you're fully aware this person is a psychopath, you've done it all, you've You've researched and studied, you've observed them over a number of years, you must get this person out of your life. They will suck you dry and destroy you. You're dealing with a human encapsulated tapeworm that only sees you as a form of sustenance, be it emotional, sexual, financial. They will just use you and eat you up and discard you, just like the system is doing to the human race as a whole. No contact ever again allows you the pause to get on with your life. But no contact ever again, in terms of the greater scheme of things, is also important as well. A lot of our distortions, this destruction of our psyche, is brought to us by things like mass media. I'm sure I'm preaching to the converted on Northeast Truth when I tell you to get rid of that bloody TV. Stop it. Don't watch it. Don't make excuses by saying, oh, I like nature programs. Nature is outside your house in the hills and the fields. You don't have to watch it on TV. You don't have to participate in the fear and the misery that they impose upon you. You don't have to watch the 6 o'clock or 9 o'clock news when they come on and you have all these absurd journalists saying things like, well, taxpayers are going to have to put another billion into this and that bank, as if it's some natural law of the universe. So you deliberately get angry, you deliberately get frustrated, and you deliberately become agitated and filled with anxieties that takes your mind off what you should be really doing in your life, and it's expanding your own consciousness through creativity and intuition. So you get rid of the TV, you never buy another newspaper ever again. You have no obligation to keep journalists in a job, just like they know they have no obligation to tell you the truth. Any journalist who's worth their salt will become an independent journalist and set up their own thing, and that they're the ones you support. You support independent media. You stay well clear of anything that's mass media because it is psychopathic. You question to see whatever is presented to you, does it have an agenda? Recently, the other day, the independent newspaper in the UK produced a story that was a classic example of how the psychopaths at the top gaslight us through media. The story implied that children today are having their brains altered by spending too much time on the internet. Now, I can tell you for a fact that most of us listening to this show, including myself, what we learned about the world in terms of knowing it was a deception, we learned this from the internet. And this is the real issue here. As for these scientists saying that the children on the internet, it alters their brain, everything you do alters your brain. If you learn tennis, it alters your brain. If you learn chess, it alters your brain. If you learn how to rob a bank, play a musical instrument, or learn to drive a new route to work every morning, you have to alter your brain in order to achieve that. Neuroplasticity is a system that allows your brain, a biological system, through creating new neural pathways in order for you to learn new skills in order for you to survive and stay alive. And that's all that was happening to these children they studied. But scientists, on an agenda, scientists paid by their psychopathic masters, spin the story to make it sound as if these children are somehow being brain damaged by being on the internet. And this thing spreads like wildfire, and then the journalists repeat it verbatim, because we live in an age where the word of a scientist is seen as more powerful than a bishop was in the Middle Ages. We live in an age now where science is supposed to be infallible, in the same way the bishops back in the early Renaissance were considered infallible. And we're told never to question science because scientists are the most honest people in the world. Well, they're not. Science is full of corruption. It's full of lies. It's full of distortion. And it's full of human beings. We have to remember that. At the end of the day, a scientist is a human being and subject to all the folly and the insecurities and drives that a normal human being is subject to. And that includes lying and falsifying data, extrapolating truths from half-truths, and then presenting them in a press release that these moronic journalists in the newspaper then pass off as a warning that your children are being destroyed by the internet. None of it is true. We must always constantly look below the surface, because in many of these stories, what's put in the headline is usually completely different than what's in the body of the text. When a scientist says maybe, could, or should, the same when a government official says maybe, could happen sometimes, or when a leader of a Wall Street investment firm goes, it's a possibility, that's not the same thing as stating an absolute fact. That is a deception. And we have to learn to distinguish between what we're told, what we hear, and what is the underlying reality behind it. Because the psychopathic control grid has the entire world living in a state of believing half-truths. And to many extents as well, the alternative community unfortunately has that too. People will see a YouTube video about somebody with one eye covered in a music video or an Egyptian symbol, and all of a sudden they'll jump on the whole thing that this is Illuminati, it's Freemasonic, or, you know, if it's an American video, 9 times out of 10 it'll have a Christian viewpoint saying that it's, you know, it's satanic, and it's none of those things in a lot of cases. It's just stupid entertainment a lot of the time. Now, I'm not saying that symbolism isn't used to control us. Absolutely it is. If you look at Babylon, the earliest money and many of the symbols that we see today, like the five-pointed star, that you see in everything from the US flag to communism, is there to Texaco. That symbol has a very powerful effect on the human psyche. And this is what they know that it changes them. The Babylonian priest class, who were psychopathic and working for psychopathic elites of Babylon, knew this as well. They knew that symbol had an effect on people, that changed their consciousness and made them easy to manipulate. So yes, symbolism on a very kind of basic level is real. The logos, as the Greeks called it. That's absolutely true on many levels, but we'd have a tendency to see too much and too surface level, especially when people are first waking up. Now, I'm not putting down people who first wake up, because I went through that stage as well. We all have. When you suddenly realize the world is a crazy place, and you have a tendency to have all this information flying at you from all different sources, from, you know, people like David Icke and Alec Jones and all that. I'm not putting down David Icke, actually. I think David Icke has done a lot of amazing work. Other than his reptilian stuff, he deserves a lot of credit. But we get all this information flying at us, bombarding us, and the next thing you know is you don't know what's real, or you have a tendency to believe that everything you're being told is about the Illuminati or the Masons or whatever is true. And that's part of this heroic journey that we all have to go through. And that's what's really happening here. When you wake up, you're embarking on a heroic journey out of the labyrinth of the psychopath and into the next level of human consciousness. And like everything that's new in this life, you know, an acorn can't become an oak tree unless it breaks through the dirt. A mother cannot give birth to a baby unless she goes through labor pains. And that's what's happening with people who are waking up. That's why they will find themselves alienated from their friends and family, because they want to sincerely in their hearts say, look, the world is a crazy place. You've got to understand that the purpose of vaccines is just a big pharma scam to get rich and so on. And it's very difficult for people who are raised on EastEnders or on the 6 o'clock news or the News of the World, or even the Irish Times or the Guardian, to grasp this, because it's outside their frames of reference in terms of their own reality. And it's often very painful when relationships break up. I know people who've lost their marriage because of this stuff. One part of the couple broke up and the other one didn't. I know people who can't relate to their families anymore. But that's part of the journey. Because you don't get to be a hero by being a coward and sitting back and accepting the status quo. Evolution is calling you to task, and we're all being woken up at this moment for a reason. And this weekend peace marathon on this station is happening for the same reason. There are people out there saying, what are you doing on a radio station like this on the weekend? You should be watching the football on TV or down the pub getting drunk. Yeah, but that's the momentary spasm of superficial contentment. What a person who's on a journey towards self-enlightenment out of the labyrinth of the psychopath, what they're on is a heroic quest for self-fulfillment. And what makes that quest so powerful and so meaningful is not the destination. Many of us may never get to the destination. We may never discover the absolute truth of anything. But the journey along the way is one hell of an amazing experience that you'll always be thankful for the rest of your life that you took it to begin with. I don't think any of us who've ever, quote unquote, woke up would ever want to go back to where we were watching EastEnders in Coronation Street and, wrapping our lives around a soccer team that, is just composed of millionaires today, and getting all emotional for these people who just don't give a damn if you're alive or dead. Most of us would never go back to that. what we want is a more meaningful life, and we're on that path, as dark as that may seem. If you look at the tarot card, the tower represents rebirth through destruction. That's why the tower is always shown as collapsing, and that's what happens in our own lives if we're us to move on, whether it be in a relationship with a toxic person, a psychopathic boss at work, or even this whole waking up movement. The tower must fall, and the tower is falling, and it's falling so we can move on and escape from the rubble. And we have to learn how to understand that the system that's been placed in front of us is not as solid and as invincible as we're told it is. Psychopaths are not as powerful as they project. They put this notion within our minds, and they're very happy for us to think that they have this secret power, and they have all this access to technology and knowledge that we don't, that can wrap us down. And they're monitoring us, and they're ready to lock us up and put us in cages and all this stuff. They may never do it. They probably never will. But our fear of it and our terror of it is enough to keep us a prisoner of our own mind. And that's why waking up is an ongoing process. You don't wake up and end up stuck in the FEMA camp mentality or worrying about the RFID chip. Yes, they're important issues, but you move beyond them. You do not become trapped and entrenched in this, because that's a psychopathic control grid. Is depending on you to fall and trip at every single hurdle they put in front of you. But if we keep pushing forward and we keep moving on, these hurdles will eventually stop, because all psychopaths, the poorest psychopath to the most powerful aristocratic psychopath, big business psychopath, government or media psychopath, are fundamentally lazy. They only put enough energy into the manipulation for as long as it's worth it. And as soon as it becomes too much trouble, and that's happening now, they give up. I'll give you 2 examples of why we're winning. Because at the end of the day, my interest in psychopaths, my writing these books, my giving these lectures, and making these videos, I would not be doing it if I didn't see there was a positive outcome. I'm not interested in being trapped in a state of fear. I'm not interested in playing the Alex Jones angle. So let's look at the solutions going forward. Before we do that, we have to look at our successes, and we've had 2 major successes. The first one was the failure of the Copenhagen climate change agreement to happen. They so shot themselves in the foot that time. That was the beginning of their plans for their new world order. They had everything pinned on an agreement happening in Copenhagen. Everything from their global police force to their global taxation system and their global banking system was pinned and hinged completely upon Copenhagen. And the Copenhagen conference failed miserably for them. And they did it themselves, because like all psychopaths, they're narcissistic and they're show-off. And what people around the world who were being told that they couldn't fly anymore, that they couldn't go on foreign holidays, they couldn't use fossil fuels and so on, all they saw was this string of diplomats arriving at this climate change conference in limousines. A single diplomat in the back of a limousine being driven to a climate change conference. What they saw were people like Bill Gates and Bob Geldof and Prince Charles arriving in private jets. Prince Charles arrived in Copenhagen in an RAF jet that he commandeered. It was like him and 6 aides in it. People see the hypocrisy of the psychopathic control system when it's presented to them. On the eve of the climate change event, the ClimateGate emails were leaked, and by the time the conference began, it had already collapsed into farce for them. And the third world countries who had played a heroic part in this pulled the whole thing out from underneath them. The third world actually probably saved the world that day. And isn't that ironic, considering we're constantly told by our leaders in the West that they have to sort the third world out? And that's the reason why, because people in the third world on many levels are more intelligent than what they are in the West. They haven't been polluted yet, and they know a scam when they've seen them. They've seen past colonial scams through various empires and religions, and they knew that the climate change thing was just the latest colonial tampering within their societies. That was their first major failure. The New World Order Fintan Dunn, an Irish journalist, he actually said that that was the death of the New World Order that day, and I absolutely agree with him the more I think about it. It died that day. The second big failure for them was the 2009 swine flu pandemic hysteria. Their media, their political structures, their civil servants, their bought and paid for science created an absolute hysteria based around this swine flu that was supposed to wipe out several 100 million people if we did not get the vaccines. The propaganda was non-stop. The newspapers and the journalists, being the pathetic repeaters they all are, just ran most ridiculous and farcical stories about how many people were going to die. And you had the likes of the head of the World Health Organization telling the rest of us to get the vaccine, but he said he wouldn't because he didn't need it. Again, this is how psychopaths are. It's one rule for them and a different one for us. This failed miserably. Almost nobody took the vaccine. All these stories you hear that so many millions took it, it did not happen. Most of the vaccines were dumped into landfills or unfortunately sent to the third world to fight AIDS. If you live in Africa and you get a cold, you're diagnosed as having AIDS, and that's a big scam by the pharmaceutical corporations to, get charity money to pay for drugs and for their profits. That's another reason why you don't give money to big charity. Ultimately, that all goes to pharmaceuticals. It's in terms of research and stuff like that, pharmaceutical companies. So that was a huge failing for them. That was an enormous failure for them, because I was reading in the city of Berlin, they had 3.5 million vaccines that were supposed to be given to the population, and Berlin had billboards and posters all over the city and non-stop media saying this was the end of the world if you do not get your vaccine, and people laughed at it. They laughed at it and refused it, and only something like 250,000 vaccines were actually taken in Berlin. The rest were all dumped in landfills or destroyed incinerators, and that happened in country after country, state after state, all around the Western world. That was their second major flop, and that really frightened and rattled the hell out of them, because for the first time ever, they realized they were losing control of the masses. Even what we would call the people we would call the sheeple or the unwoken people, even they saw through this scam of what it was. What the 2009 swine flu was not some kind of mind control program to destroy our brains with a chemical lobotomy. What it was a bailout for the pharmaceutical companies. The greedy bastards in pharmaceuticals, just like the ones in banking. They saw the ones in banking and Wall Street getting these enormous taxpayer bailouts. And the CEOs, the psychopaths who run all these big pharmaceutical companies said, hey, we deserve a piece of that. Well, how come we can't get our noses in that trough? We want some of that public money as well. Now, our politicians and the psychopaths in politics, and in particularly the United Nations and particularly the World Health Organization, devised this really disgusting plan where they were going to whip up this fear of a swine flu pandemic. And this fear of the swine flu pandemic was to justify spending money on vaccines. That's why all the big pharmaceutical manufacturers all got a piece of the action. It wasn't that one company got it. If you look at who the public money was spent on, everyone from Pfizer to see the guy got a piece of the action. And that was how they snuck the taxpayer bailout into these corporations. And that's another example of how we're locked down. But people saw that. So what's happening now is the pyramid is starting to break apart at the bottom. And this is, when it breaks down, that's when we're on the path to peace. It's going to take a while. Now, we have to do this ourselves in our own lives. Like everything else in life, it doesn't happen by sitting at home and worrying about it. We all have to take proactive measures to bring the psychopathic control grid down. Non-compliance with the control structure is the most powerful one of all. And then self-autonomy and your own personal independence is the second route out of that. Then you lose your fear, and then you gain your confidence, and then you move on. Now, as we head towards this post-psychopathic society, and it is coming, we're going to be confronted with new ways. The psychopaths in charge are going to confront us and present us with challenges that may or may not happen, but we should be aware they're coming. They're going to try and fake more terrorist attacks. more pandemics. They're going to really ramp up things like having a fear of, asteroids hitting the Earth or some kind of major climatic problem. These are all going to come down, but they're all going to fail because they're not getting their way anymore. And eventually, as these things begin to fail, they will throw the towel in. And many of the psychopaths who've risen to the top of politics, will just be happy enough to go into banking or money and then just be greedy and just live the rest of their days out as parasites. They won't be particularly interested in social control. Groups like the Rockefeller Foundation and the Council of Foreign Relations and all these gigantic quangos, they will all start to begin to dissipate because people won't be paying them any attention. If people aren't buying the newspapers, and the newspaper reporters have no press releases to print from these organizations. So those organizations are essentially put out of business. Now they will try and lock down the internet. Whether they're going to bring in an internet too, that'll be a pay-per-view kind of subscription system, that has yet to be seen. But technically that's extremely difficult because of the actual way the web functions. It doesn't work like a single cable feed. It's a matrix of connections and nodes that wrap around the planet. And unless they can control places like Iran, Russia and China, they really can't control the World Wide Web and the spread of information. But even that won't break it down because by the time they get to be able to technically be able to do that, so many people will have woken up that their whole rule will be undermined simply by people who will know it's a scam, it's a joke. And I'm seeing it all the time. I'll give you an example of it. As an Irish message board I was on recently, and I would call this message board basically the mouthpiece of the establishment. It represents mostly people who work for the government, like civil servants and stuff. It's just a basic general message board, but it's a very good way I've used to gauge the social dynamic. When the Lisbon Treaty was being voted in, if anyone was to say this whole thing is a scam and a setup, the majority of the posters on the group would slag this person off. The one who gave this most smug and arrogant, typical, debunker comment like a conspiracy theorist and laugh out loud, they would get the most thumbs up. Well, since the banking bailouts, that's gone through 180 degrees. The board is now controlled by people who want Ireland out of the EU. They want the banker bailouts to stop, and they're completely seeing through the facade that is the psychopathic control grid, or indeed the Irish version of the psychopathic control grid that revolves out of our elites and our ruling classes, and they're seeing right through this. And now the majority, when anybody comes on there now and puts ahead the state-sanctioned debunker notion, they're immediately ridiculed by the majority of the posters on the board, and they're ignored and told to shut up. And anyone who gets on there and says we have to get out of the EU, end these banker bailouts and get the punt back, they will now be the people on that board who get the majority of the thumbs up. So we've seen a complete switch in a very short time. And that's what's happening. It's happening in little bits and bobs everywhere. But when you stand back from the canvas, not only do you see the psychopathic control grid, which controls everything, but you'll also see that the psychopathic control grid is dissolving, and all these isolated and individual groupings of people who call themselves truthers, alternative community, the wake-up community, certain elements of the New Age community, they're basically all beginning to become mainstream. This has become what we are here on Northeast Truth. We are the real media because this is a media that has a meaning. This is a media that people will stop and listen to. It's not something that's on the background in a pub that's ignored by people and you get a little news snippet between Lady Gaga and Rihanna. This is real information that people are tuned into here. So this is the real media. The mainstream media is dead. It killed itself. It killed itself by making itself being obsolete to the society at large. And this is where things like Northeast Truth and this movement over the weekend can step up to the bat and take over and become the real, genuine mainstream media. Just like it happened in the 60s, and it will happen again now. This time, it won't be controlled by the CIA. It'll be controlled because of the internet and because we have the technology, from the grassroots up. So that's my sermon for today. The world is run by psychopaths. The psychopathic individual is a predatory subspecies humanoid who's driven through the reptilian complex on his brain that ultimately manifests from a predatory consciousness, and it's the cause of all the problems in the world. And we deal with this problem through no contact ever again with psychopaths in our personal life and non-compliance with the psychopathic control grid. And then, when enough of us are doing that, and it is going to happen, then we'll finally get the world we want, including the peaceful solutions that we all long and seek.